All right, afternoon, everybody. This is going to be another more of a free-form session hosted by just Mark and Doug this week. Andy is out, but we're going to be offering sort of perfSONAR office hours, and the rules are there are no rules. But the first rule is, ask a question. Maybe you know the answer. Maybe you want to hear it answered by the perfSONAR developers. If you want to see a demonstration or find out the right way to do some process. We can sort of do it using the old raise the hand method, and I can acknowledge people, or everybody should have the ability to just unmute and ask your question directly. I'd prefer to do that instead of the chat room method, but if people want to type in the chat room, that's okay too. So I will hand it over to Mark or Doug to sort of just get us started. And like with most meetings, if it goes silent for a little bit, we have a couple of canned questions and things that we can always ask to get things moving. But I'll let Mark take it away.
All right, thank you, Jason. And so welcome to Doug, who's kind of Andy's understudy today, because he's on vacation. So for those that don't know, I'm sort of a little more back end of the system, more measurement and things like that. Doug's thing is a little more of the front end, so he can answer all of your questions about Grafana and that sort of stuff if that's what you're into. So, um,
Fortunately, Doug was the guy who was available.
you are now the expert. You're the smartest guy in the room. Um, so anyway, I guess we'll open it up. If anybody has a question or a topic, fire away. Sal using the old meat space hand method. Very good.
Yes, I couldn't locate the virtual hand. So howdy, folks. I'm Sal from Learn in Texas. It's probably related to more Grafana related questions, Grafana and OpenSearch. Um, Trying to wrap my mind around splitting up different, and I can take this offline as well. Different creating different dashboards from different group sets of PS config, how to filter data in OpenSearch. So, for example, if you have bad data in OpenSearch, how to clean it up so that the correct data gets displayed in Grafana, those kinds of questions. And I know I bothered Phil a couple of years ago about a bunch of this stuff and how to get dashboards up and running. And we kind of dug into OpenSearch a little bit, but not very familiar with OpenSearch and the Lucene queries that Grafana uses to query OpenSearch on the back end. So looking for some help on that or some pointers on that.
Well, off some races here. Um, I don't have a lot of experience. I'll be perfectly transparent. I don't have a ton of experience with the OpenSearch instantiation that we're using in perfSONAR right now. I have a ton of Elastic experience, and that's plus or minus the same thing. It's the same query language effectively. So I guess when you're talking about bad data, is this just stuff like kind of from an earlier test type of setup that just kind of got stuffed in there and now you want to eliminate that entirely? Gotcha. Okay.
Yes, that and possibly also like when we're looking at feeding all of our perfSONAR test results into the Logstash OpenSearch backend, how to filter out like if we're trying to create multiple dashboards from that same set of data. So if we want like maybe two hosts showing up versus all four hosts that are feeding data in, is there some way to filter that in Grafana, or is it we have to set up different dashboards? It kind of stretches out into a larger set of questions, I guess. So I'm sorry, I'm bringing this up as a big one bundle question.
Let's let's go with the first one first. Let's go with the data issue, and then we'll move forward from there. So there's actually an OpenSearch. It's kind of like a Kibana in the Elastic Stack for OpenSearch, and in terms of kind of trying to pinpoint the data you're looking for and then do a delete by query, that's probably the easiest way to do it. And we're on Slack. You and I go back a little ways. I can walk you through that a little more specifically, but that's the short answer. Is basically, but if you if it's kind of a time period, usually it's a I do a quick search for give me records that are, less than this timestamp. I just look at what's returned, make sure it's what I'm expecting. And then there's actually a delete by query that uses the same type of syntax where you can say delete records that have a timestamp that is older than this or meet some other specific criteria that you're looking for. And then it'll actually just work backwards through the OpenSearch database and wipe those out. So that's probably the easiest way to do that. There's a few different ways you could skin this cat, but that's probably in my mind, the easiest way to go about it. Um, like I said, offline, I can get you some links to the dashboard pieces, and that'll help you out a lot with being able to view uh, database sizes and some other metrics that honestly you'll probably be interested in anyway that aren't real transparent and just by just installing perfSONAR. Um, as for the Grafana stuff, Phil turned on his camera, so it's getting serious now. He's ready to jump in here and tell me I'm wrong. Uh, um, as for the Grafana stuff, in this one, I guess it kind of depends. So yes, you can absolutely filter this data in Grafana. However, I find that modifying the Grafana templates that come with perfSONAR just lead to a little more grief down the road. Like, yes, it works now, but as things change and as your, designs for things change, all of a sudden things start breaking. I had a problem with UCSF they were having some issues and they'd done some custom Grafana work to get it working, but moving forward, that caused some other problems for them. Um, so my understanding, unless I'm wrong here, maybe Phil can actually chime in on this because he's done some of this stuff as well, is kind of like the old Mad Dash mentality of you go into that JSON file and you're going to basically have a couple, different groups for different purposes, and you can create different dashboards that show up based on those different groupings. So it looks like a lot of redundancy, but it's kind of designed to work that way where you have all of your hosts and stuff listed in that JSON file, and then you're going to be creating discrete groups that are testing against each other and filtering stuff out that way is going to be more of the perfSONAR methodology versus the let's get out into the custom weeds. I might do something goofy with Grafana, but I'm prepared to pay the price for that. So I don't want to put that out there as a solution for most people.
Yeah,
Is that Oh,
oh yeah,
go ahead,
I
Phil.
think I'm sorry. I was just gonna say that yeah, that's probably the direction I wanted to go with because, got all our hosts, they're all reporting to a single collector, so to speak. We want to be able to build out different dashboards based on either testing or groupings, that final. So yeah, if you have any resources that I can look up and not have to, bother you offline, that'd be great. But yes, please go ahead, Phil.
That tickled something in my memory, and perhaps Mark can help with this as well. Um, for a while there, I was having the databases grow and grow and grow, and then I think Andy mentioned that basically everything is on a 30-day cycle. And once he mentioned that, I noticed that indeed the size of the database doesn't really change over time, and so something is cleaning it up. So maybe that's all you have to do is just wait 30 days, and anything old in the database might go away. I don't know if that's true, but that I know that my databases aren't growing like they used to.
Well, it's not a cleanup, it's a roll up. So after 30 days, it goes back and it dereses the data that's there. So you don't have, you get more data summaries as opposed to all the individual test results and stuff. So that old data is still technically there and it would be summarized if he waited longer. It wouldn't be as specific, but it'd still be there. So it's not going to quote disappear. It just, it won't be there in as a specific form. So that's why you get that kind of sawtooth is where, you're building your data, you're building data, and after 30 days, it does a roll up and then goes, kind of continues that cycle. So if you look at it over time, you shouldn't see, a slightly tilted upwards graph, but it'll look, if you draw a line through the sawtooth, it just won't look like this.
Yeah, and I can't remember off the top of my head whether we dropped the rolled up stuff off or not.
I don't think so by default, but I could be wrong about
Yeah,
that.
I mean,
I don't think
I suppose it is something we'll have to worry about eventually, but
right. But I don't think there's a canned right now, like, oh, after, 90 days or 120 days, that data just disappears because some people want, indefinite amounts of data
yeah.
storage and stuff. So
Yeah, I mean it's difficult too because different operators kind of want different things. If you're a small institution, you don't care if you get a year's worth, then
Yeah.
it's a whole different thing than like CERN or somebody else. But
Might be an
um,
interesting feature for the future, honestly, just kind of spitballing. Just put a few knobs in there for data retention when you do your initial
yeah,
setup.
yeah, I was thinking this would be a good thing to write a ticket on, and bring it to the developer's attention. There you go, Sal. You now have some homework.
Yeah.
Um, write us a ticket.
Does
All
that
right.
Sal, does that answer most of your stuff? Obviously, I owe you some back end here, but hopefully, does that give you kind of an idea where you're at?
Yeah, it does. And I can definitely, connect with you offline and we can talk through it. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
sure.
Thank you.
Happy to.
Cool. All right. Anything else on that, or shall we move on? Oh, I see Phil is raising his meat space hand.
Just a quick comment. I think it was at the last office hours or maybe the one before. Andy did show a couple of links to how to mess with OpenSearch for cleaning up things and dealing with that. And I honestly don't remember what they were right now, but I'm sure I could dig back through notes to find it. But Andy definitely put out a few comments about how to deal with that.
I think at least the last two of these, I know there was one that didn't get recorded recently, but I think the last couple of these should be on YouTube, so you can check the Lunch and Learn page for that. Okay, well, I can't see everybody, so I guess I could change my view so I can. So if anybody else has anything, please feel free to unmute and speak up. Matt, go ahead. Matt, you're muted.
How about now?
Now you're not muted.
Okay. I'm not a regular Zoom user. Um, so from a testing perspective, can I import a multi-process throughput task so I can run it regularly or have perfSONAR running it regularly instead of me having to ad hoc
Yeah,
run it?
absolutely.
So I
Yeah,
haven't figured out how to do that yet.
okay.
I tried to sort of put together a JSON, but it won't accept sort of -P4 or whatever it is.
Okay. So the best way to do that would actually be to use psconfig if that's not what you're doing already. So
Which config?
it's called psconfig. I'll talk a little bit more about it in a second. So just to kind of get your use case squared, do you have just like one system that you want to run a bunch of throughputs to other systems, or do you want to run a mesh of them, or what?
Well, right now we only have one system with a 100 gig card in it,
Okay.
and we're running it outwards towards like another system with a 100 gig card in it.
Okay.
So in
Okay.
order to
So
get
that's
sort of the 100 gig, we need sort of the,
So
or,
it's just sort of maybe a one-to-one thing for the time being, and you might expand it
yeah.
later. Okay, yeah, that's pretty easy to deal with. So, psconfig is we used to have this thing called regular testing. This is years and years ago, and psconfig is kind of what replaced it. And what psconfig is, and there's a whole section on this in the documentation, but I'll kind of thumbnail it for you. Um, psconfig's job is to give it, or what it gets you is sort of a central way to configure testing on multiple systems. Now, if you just have one system, that's okay. I mean, the number is n, so it doesn't matter if it's 1 or 50. Um, but essentially, what you can do is with psconfig, there is a JSON configuration file for it. And if you've been exporting things, say from the command line, just kind of save and use for later, some of it will look familiar. But essentially, it has a bunch of different sections in it. It has one called addresses that defines the machines that are going to be involved. You have another one called groups that groups those addresses into groups. So you may have one or two addresses, and your group will be fairly small. But you also have things that define what the measurements are going to be, how frequently they're done, which groups are involved, and where the data gets sent when you're done with it. I can't remember. We may have a good summary on our YouTube channel. Um, and let me make a note here to just take a look at the end when we're done. And I will will check that out for you. Um, but essentially, what the way it works is you take the JSON file and you put it on a web server someplace, and you just tell the machines that are involved, go get your configuration from whatever the URL where the thing lives is, and then they'll carry out the test that you ask for. And then if you have it configured for archiving, for example, it'll send the results off to an archive someplace. I know that was a little bit of a mouthful, but does that answer your question, or at least get you started?
Well, I mean, I am importing things now through pscheduler with a JSON,
Okay, so you're doing things
that
from the
that
command
that
line, is that
works.
right?
Yeah,
Okay,
and that
okay,
generally has been working outside of this sort of multi-processor test, or
okay.
you know.
Yeah. So what you're doing now will actually end up being kind of like if you switch to using PS config, what you're doing now will be sort of one of the inputs to that
Okay.
process. Um, so I can
Well,
go ahead.
I said I'll look into it.
Okay. Yeah, the documentation's pretty good. We did a unfortunately it wasn't recorded or anything. We just did a workshop um, recently, but I'm pretty sure we may have a couple things on our YouTube channel, and maybe if somebody can sling Doug another question, I'll go take a look real quick while he's answering it. Um, but yeah, if you want to do kind of regularly scheduled testing, PS config is really the right tool for that. And that way you don't have to run stuff, by hand or with cron jobs or anything else like that, and it'll just do it. Okay. Matt has vanished. Um, all right. Anyone else have something? Quiet crowd today.
We've either dazzled them with our brilliance, or
Or
they,
we've bored them silly.
yeah, I was gonna say they know we don't know anything now, and they just stopped asking. One of
Yeah.
the two.
Um,
I have a question.
yeah, fire away.
Kind of a general question. Um, how much? So I'm from the University of Victoria. I'm responsible for some personas in the WLCG mesh, and they're kind of old hardware at this point. They have 16 gig of RAM, and they keep running out of memory, basically. So I can't keep them operating. Um, so I'm wondering if they're misconfigured or if that's sort of expected.
Well, WLCG is also sort of an odd case because they run. I don't know. I presume they have a couple of big meshes, and I don't know which one. I don't know which
Yeah,
one
it's
you're.
part of the Atlas mesh.
Oh, okay. So
When it
that's
was
pretty
working
sizable.
properly, it I would see test results like about 100 maybe different test results.
Yeah, that
So
sounds
that's
about right.
that's V4 and V6 and like latency and throughput. So
Okay.
I don't know, 40 or something hosts in the mesh maybe.
Yeah. So
That scale.
one of the things that we've run into recently, and you're not the first one to bump into this, but several feature releases ago, we made a change to the way pscheduler um, takes care of executing the measurements. I'll spare you an extensive discussion of what goes on under the hood, but essentially, most of pscheduler is written in Python, and Python has this thing called the global interpreter lock that lets you do multi-threading, but on sort of a limited basis. And it's effectively it's kind of cooperative multi-threading on one core, which isn't so good. WLCG was kind of responsible for us bumping that ceiling, and what we ended up doing was we split out. We essentially set things up to fork off multiple processes so we didn't have to deal with that limit. And a side effect of that has been that there are typically certain things like the background latency measurements tend to get run for 24 hours at a time. And what ends up happening because of that is we'll end up forking off these processes that live a long time and grow. So we've had people, you're not the first one to bump into this, but we've had people that run out of memory. Um, I would have to look at some of this kind of depends on exactly what the workload is. It would probably be worth, and if you want to drop me a line sometime, we could do this. It'd probably only take us, 15 minutes or a half hour. Um, but one of the things that we can do is take a look at the system itself and see what's chewing up all the memory. Because we've run into a few things in the past where there was a misconfiguration problem or something else like that. But odds are pretty excuse me, odds are pretty good. We have these long running processes that grow. Um, and we're kind of working on a solution to that.
Yeah, I can send you an email, let you know
Sure.
what's
Yeah.
using the memory. Yeah, I haven't actually looked at it in quite a while because it's been
Okay.
like this for months. I keep expecting to get new hardware, but it hasn't happened yet. It may not
Yeah.
happen for a little while, so I kind of like to revive them.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, it's not, it's not perfSONAR does not require huge amounts of hardware. So, it also might be worth consulting with WLCG and finding out, or other, other members of the mesh basically to find out what they're running. Just to make it, 16 to me sounds like an okay number, but I'd have to look at the workload because again, it depends.
okay,
So
thanks.
that's kind of it's kind of a half non-answer, but it's kind of the best I can do without
Well,
the
if yeah, I
facts in front
mean,
of me.
if
But
you're saying that 16 should be,
yeah,
somewhat
drop me a
okay,
line. My
then
email
yeah,
is
it's probably
is
fixable. Yeah.
yeah, my email is
Okay.
my first initial and my last name at internet2.edu.
Great.
So
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I've never run into problems running 16 gigs, even on fairly busy machines. So
yeah,
yeah.
and other things do go wrong once in a while. So okay, who's next? Fire away, Phil.
How's the health of your little script, the little engine that could?
Which one? The installer?
Yeah, the installer script.
That's actually pretty good. It's actually in pretty good shape. We have a couple of things going on in the background that we haven't merged into the kind of the official version yet. But we'll probably do that with the next release.
Do
Um,
you touch that between releases or do you keep it
yeah,
just for
usually
releases?
no. It's well, so yeah, I'm gonna learn to speak here. That's my first problem. Um, it- we sort of treat that as a utility that's kind of detached from the versioning cycle. So I mean, if there's a bug in it, that's something that we can, because we don't have to like publish packages or anything for it. If we find a bug in it or something else like that, we'll fix it, and just get it right out there immediately. So it's kind of a living document, I guess. Let me take a look. It's actually been a little while since I looked at that. Let me see what we.
Self-centered as I am, I'm wondering if you had added that flag that you talked about in the issue to add the few Grafana uh, repos to the
Oh, yeah, let me take a look at
archive
that.
script.
Hang on. Um, I think we talked about that, and I think maybe I did it. Let me take a look at the
You,
history
you
here.
definitely added the flag, but I don't know if you I didn't see that you added the actual loading of the repos.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, looking at the history, I think you're right. I think that's still out on the back
Okay,
burner.
just
Um,
curious.
yeah, the stuff that we've added to it recently. We discovered that people were able to run it on OSs we didn't support. So we put in a thing to make it bulk at that. Um, but there is additionally, and this will probably happen officially in 5.2. But we're going to be adding support for Oracle 8 as well, because that's something that some of IU's customers need. So that will that will be supported by the script soon as well, if it's not already. For everyone else's benefit, it didn't occur to me I should have explained this up front. The script that Phil is talking about is a thing we developed, I guess, was it last year or the year before? It's called the auto installer. And it's essentially it's a shell script that you can download using curl, and you just pipe it through to a shell. and it gives you a really quick way to install one of the bundles. It essentially does all the stuff that's in the instructions, but it does it for you, so you don't have to cut and paste and type and stuff. All right. Anyone else have a question? I'm going to hand the reins over to Doug for a minute. I'm going to go take a look on our YouTube channel and see if I can find the PS config stuff.
I was trying to decide how much to razz you about. Sure, I'll just download this script from you and pipe it to sudo and see what happens.
It's actually kind of what the instructions are, but I mean it's there. I mean it's there for review, so it's.
Oh, I know. I'm just giving you grief. All right. Anybody else have anything they want to bring up? They've been pondering maybe feature requests that I can pass on to Mark to make him do more work, that sort of thing. I thought for sure that I'd get somebody with that. I did notice, actually, I used that script recently. The National Radio Astronomy Observatory, hosted at UVA, is doing an update to all their perfSONAR infrastructure, and they're on Red Hat 8, and they're developing their Ansible playbooks to get to Red Hat 9 sometime at the end of March. And so we were trying to get this thing done, and I gave them the script, and all of a sudden it came up and yelled that they were on Red Hat 8. I'm like, wow, that's new. It's good because now we know before it just started installing. But so I actually ran into that just last week. I can verify it does work. It's a quiet room today. I guess these perfSONAR chats have been working. People are getting their stuff answered.
Okay. I'm going to paste for Matt's benefit. I'm going to paste a link to a talk that I think Andy gave about 5 years ago when we first. I put it in the chat here, but it's sort of like a basic introduction to PS config. That'll give you some pointers as to how to get started. I think we've added a few features since, but it should give you a good overview. And as always, you can drop us a line if you have trouble with it.
And Matt, it occurred to me as I was thinking about that, where you were talking about doing the parallel testing. I don't know what version of perfSONAR you're running, if it's the latest, greatest bleeding edge that has iPerf 3 multi-threaded included, or if it's an earlier version of 5 that does not, but you would actually have to specify using iPerf 2 if you wanted to do multi-thread testing in that JSON config file. And I just thought about that. Depending on your version, that could be a bugaboo.
I guess I'm old because I've been just trying with iPerf 2 regardless of what's in iPerf 3.
Okay. I got you.
Yeah, I mean, and two is fine. It'll go fast because this was one of the things that that the developers of iPerf 3 had said for a long time. They're like, well, iPerf 3 was designed for a different use case than iPerf 2 was. iPerf 2 had the multi-threading in it. And just in the last year or so, I guess it was last year at TechX we talked about it the first time, not at 24 but 23. They had just released the multi-threaded version of iPerf 3. So you can use either. It really sort of depends on it kind of depends on some on what you're trying to do. There are certain features that iPerf 3 has that 2 doesn't. So if you're doing some of the more exotic things, I think like congestion control and things like that, iPerf 3 supports that a little better. But just for sort of default throughput testing, you can use either. Generally though, we like 3 because 2 is not really heavily maintained.
I think the iPerf 3 that you guys ship is typically much newer than, say, what Red Hat
Yes. Yeah.
supports on there.
Yeah, we ship the latest that was available as of release. So you'll always have the if you install out of our repository, you'll always have the newest one.
Right.
I
And
think
as
perfSONAR has a little inside baseball with ESNet, so that makes sense.
just a little. All right. We could be running a short one if nobody has any more questions. Go ahead. If the floor is yours, Matt.
While I have you, um, so we're running 5.1.4, so I don't know if this matters for this version or not, but I think when we sort of delete tests, we're still seeing them run, which I think was a common problem at one point. I'm not sure if there's a solution to, after I've deleted the test, it seems to routinely run and fail because I'm trying to delete it because the endpoint is gone.
Okay, so you're talking about like when you use cancel on the command line for things that are set up to repeat.
Right. My
So
understanding is if I put in that long string of code and cut it off at the right point, it should cut off all future tests as well.
yeah, so there's what you get back when you run something. There are two. If you run things on the command line, you'll get two URLs. The first one is the URL for the task, and then the second one is tasks have if you specify them to repeat, you'll get multiple runs, and the runs are the longer ones. Um, Unfortunately, because we use UUIDs as identifiers, they're kind of long, and the URLs get long. But yeah, if you say pscheduler cancel um, and the task URL, that should cancel any future runs of that. Now there is an exception. One of the things that we don't have. Are you only running throughput, or are you running other things as well?
We're running other things as
Okay.
well.
Okay. So one of the things that's kind of been a thorn in our side, we actually have somebody working on this as we speak, is that things like if you're running, I mean, throughput's not a big deal because you run that for, 30 seconds, a minute at a time, and then you go away for a few hours to run it again. However, if you're running streaming background latency, typically those things tend to run for 24 hours at a time. And psconfig is actually pretty good about maintaining all that stuff. The problem is that there's nothing in the system right now that can stop one of those in the middle. So what ends up happening is if you run the thing, and again, this depends. If you're not using psconfig, you may run into this. Um, but what ends up happening if you run it for 24 hours, there's just no way to stop it in the middle other than getting onto the system and killing it. But the software will see, oh, that's not running anymore, and it'll start it back up. Um, so you might actually be better off using psconfig to maintain that because that'll if you run the things for 24 hours at a time, if you make a change, psconfig will see that we'll see that the thing you were running isn't needed anymore, and it won't schedule another one. That makes sense. But yes, several of us have been bitten by that one, myself included. So, and the responsibility falls on me to change it. So, but we're working on it. It's unfortunately it's kind of a non-trivial change because we have to go ahead and change a bunch of things that surround how we run outside programs and things. So, but we'll get there. Anyone else?
All right. Well, Jason, we can probably close this down. We'll meet for here.
I suppose. I'm looking looking squarely at Ken Miller and know that he
So was
has to have
I.
a question.
Yes. I saw him kind of stroking his beard thoughtfully earlier. It's like, oh, I bet he's trying to cook something up for us.
No, we have this Pennsylvania Science DMZ project, and we're deploying those out. We have one leg so far we found, and we've kind of held a vendor accountable for a poor SLA. So we're kind of go back to them right now and try to get a credit back by using perfSONAR. So that's always fun to try to use perfSONAR to get money back from a vendor. But so yeah, it's running about maybe 55-60% of its capacity on a 10 gig link to one campus. But otherwise, yeah, no, I mean, like I said, just trying to scale things out where I can. But
If you have any success getting that money back, maybe you could write up a fact that we could put on the perfSONAR website, the docs website.
yeah, well, I did that at Penn State probably 4 or 5 times actually. Used help persona. I had always had a 6 pack of old laptops underneath my desk running persona all the time, and I'd run them out and drop them off at a campus, and then validate the vendor circuit. So it works quite well for that. So yeah, we did find a dirty fiber the other day with it too, but we didn't really have a lot of data. Otherwise, I was going to share it, with the group. Um, but yeah, the vendor figured that out, but too quickly before it could get a person on our box at the other end. Um, but otherwise, yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Well, if you get your refund, that's the Personar money back guarantee right there.
exactly. Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah. No, aside from that, just other campuses, trying to work with them like that. Just get deployments out there. Um, was there any follow-up to the SC testing? Is it just DTN testing, or is that Personar testing through the firewall packets on the Signet floor? Uh,
Um,
was that just Ezra and the DTNs, or was there actually Personar being tested through the firewalls as well?
no, so we kind of limited we kind of limited. I think there may have been a little outside activity, but mostly last year we were mostly limited to just on the floor.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't
So
sure. So
it's an interesting thing there every year because I mean how things come together with routing has a lot of influence on how much we get done.
yeah,
So, but yeah, we'll go beat on it again next year like we always do.
yeah.
For those who don't know, it's Ken's fault that I'm involved with SC. So
No, we wanted to kind of keep growing Persona on the show floor. So um, yeah, the only thing we really have going on is like overlay networks, things like that. We're looking to multi-home slash multi-tag different interfaces on the box and push those out across the state. So trying to see how the overlay networks work with things like that. But otherwise, it should be pretty good.
yeah, speaking of small boxes out at campuses, and this probably goes back a couple years now, but on a previous edition of this series, Ed Cologne from Michigan came in and gave an interesting talk about the small boxes he's fielding. They had some super micro boxes, and they did some really interesting things with bonding the interfaces together because I think they had one fiber and a couple of copper Ethernets. And the things were set up in such a way that they could just take any of them and plug it into the network at any point and have them come up on decent usable IP addresses. And they knew, what box number 5 was here and box number 6 was at the other end. They
Hmm.
always came up. They always came up on the same addresses and were always properly routable. So if you happen to be perusing the previous episodes of this series, that's worth looking at.
Yeah, and the only other thing that's really come up is some of the quilt meeting last week. Some of the Wrens are talking about leveraging other products like Thousand Eyes and I forget the other brand they were looking at. But I'm like, why aren't you just using Personar? And they're like, well, we don't know how to do that to measure cloud stuff. So I'm like, oh geez. So
Yeah.
but there's some of the latency things out there, and even looking at DNS and even API latencies, things like that could be possible, but it's just going to take more development time to get there. So
Yeah. And I mean Thousand Eyes does a few things that we don't and vice versa. So it's you know, um we don't have a boat payment to make, so we're not out beating the we're not out beating the the pavement for revenue and stuff. But
Yeah.
you know, so
Yeah.
all right.
Thanks.
Anybody else have anything? You know what? If Matt, if you want to hang around for a few minutes, and everybody else, of course, is welcome too. If you want, I can pull up some relevant parts of the documentation and kind of talk about the just kind of talk about the PS config structure for a few minutes.
Sure.
If you think that would be helpful. All right, give me just a minute to just give me just a minute to grab a web browser here. Oh, look at that. I can even share the screen. Cool. All right. So this is docs.perfSONAR.net, which is where all the documentation lives. So you're probably familiar enough with what's covered in this section about how to run measurements with pscheduler. The PS config section here has this quick start guide. Let's see. This is installation. Sorry. It's this guy here, this introduction to PS config templates. Andy Lake wrote this, and it's pretty good. But he has sort of a bunch of examples that just kind of revolve around colored shapes, but it's sort of the same. It's sort of the it's a, they sort of they kind of equate to hosts, but they're sort of a good visual aid. So the basic concepts, as I mentioned before, you have addresses, you have groups, and the groups get put together in three different types of there are three different types of groups. One is a mesh. So, for example, if you have these blue, red, and green, you'll get essentially you'll get blue to red, blue to green, red to blue, and so on. You'll get all six of the possible combinations. So typically, um, typically, for example, if you have, if you're an organization, you have 10 pops, you'd probably do something like, you do 10 of these or you do one of these with 10 addresses in it. And you'd get testing from each pop to all the others. There is another concept with another type of group called disjoint, um, which is where you kind of have different A sides and B sides. You'd use that for example, if you have a host that's an external host they're not subscribed to this mesh, they're not part of it, but you still want to do testing maybe from some of your points to some of theirs. And then finally, there's also a simple list, which will just do things on three systems for you. So that's kind of the group section. Um, Tasks are basically little templates that say, this is a measurement I want to do. This is the test I want to run. This is how often we're going to do it. And this is the archive part is where we send the results when we're done. So typically, if you're in an environment like this, you'll have a bunch of perfSONAR nodes, and you'll also have another system that has the archive and maybe the Grafana bundle on it, and you can use that to display all this stuff as it comes up. Um, so this is sort of how it all gets put together. So in this case, the example is you have these three hosts, the blue one, the red one, the green one. They're in a mesh together, and you have the six different combinations of tests going on, or the six different combinations of pairs of them. Those get fed to the task templates that say, I'm going to do throughput between blue and red and into blue and green and so on. And all that stuff gets filled into kind of a concrete version of a task. So that's sort of the conceptual thing. Um, all this stuff is all done with a JSON file. So the rest of this, and I'm not going to sit here and just read all of it to you. But um, essentially, you can the simplest sort of form of address is right here. It's a little bigger, so it's a little more readable. There are some other things you can add metadata and so forth that gets passed along for other things to use. But so here, for example, this is sort of the actual kind of JSONized version of the addresses, the three circles that we saw. and they just happen to have some metadata. And the metadata is totally free form. You can stick whatever you want in it. So in this case, we just said the shape was circle and the color was blue. Let's see, groups, as I mentioned. And again, this is sort of everything I showed you above, just expressed as JSON. So in this case, we have this group here that's a mesh, and it's a group of the three different circles, and that will cause if when it's used, that will cause circle one to do test to 2 and 3, and 2 to 1 and 3, and 3 to 1 and 2. So um, fairly straightforward there. I'm going to skip the disjoint stuff on the list for a minute. Okay, so the test section, and this is where some of the things that Matt, you've been doing with importing JSON and stuff will show up. This is not going to be quite in the same format you're used to, but essentially when you define a test, you might say something like you have this colors test. I'm going to kind of rephrase this in things that in kind of more concrete terms. Let's say this is actually going to be a throughput test. So instead of the type being colors, it's throughput, for example. So you'd say this is a throughput test, and then you'd have the spec section that would have the source and the destination, and maybe the bandwidth and any other parameters um, that you wanted to add to it. Um, one of the things that that psconfig does is it lets you do these little substitutions. So if you think of the things in the spec like maybe as source and destination, what you can do is pick out bits and pieces from each address. And the way it will work is when psconfig decides that it needs to do a test between like the blue host and the red host, um, it will take the address information for the first of those and put it in the zero element of this, and then the address information for the second one of these and put it in the one element. So that gives you sort of the ability to say, okay, I'm doing a throughput test between blue and red, and I can say that the source is blue and the destination is red, for example. Does that make sense, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically how I've been using the JSON, but just with the pscheduler command.
Yeah, yeah. So essentially,
Schedule.
and I just wanted to make sure this was clear. This little blob here that I have highlighted will look a lot like what you're feeding into pscheduler manually. So when it comes time to do this, one of the things that we did with this for all the parts of the system, if you were saving off JSON specs from the command line tool, you can use the export switch to dump those off into a file, and then you can just take the contents of those files and dump them right in here. So it's all
familiar with that.
So that'll help you take the stuff that you have and turn it into a mesh fairly easily. Let's see. I'm not gonna cover this too much, but essentially this is just sort of the construct for doing substitutions, which you saw above. The last piece of this is archives. Matt, I don't know if you were, if you're running cron jobs or something like that, and you're capturing the output. But sort of the typical MO is if you have a lot of these systems, and again, if you just have one, it's sort of a little less inconvenient to just go look at the raw results. But when you start to have more than one, typically what you do is you stand up our archive bundle and our Grafana bundle so that you can visualize all this stuff. And the archive is just a way the archive specification is just a way to tell pscheduler once you have a result for this measurement, here's where to send it. And I think there may be some tutorial stuff on this from a previous episode of this. But essentially, you give the thing a name, and then you have the archiver type, which here is just HTTP, which is what you use to get it into OpenSearch. And the way archivers work is they have a type, and then they have a bunch of kind of type-specific data. So we can do things like a year or two ago, for example, Ken asked me if I could develop something that would take a piece of a piece of a result and stuff it into a datagram and send it someplace. Can't remember what he was using that for, but it seemed sane at the time, so I said sure, why not? And we did it. Um, so the difference between, say, the HTTP archiver and the datagram archiver is what goes into this data section. So the data section for HTTP has a URL in it, and for datagram, it might have a destination host and a destination port. Um, we also have an archiver called the bit bucket, which just drops the measurement on the floor. That has no data because it doesn't do anything. So, all right, so that's archivers, and then essentially, oh, schedules, yeah. Um, so scheduling again, if you've done kind of regular scheduling with um, with pscheduler, some of this will look familiar. Um, these are the names of these things are essentially right off the command line uh, from the from the command line options. So this, for example, this says repeat once an hour, let it slip as much as 1 hour, and pick a time within that hour at random to do it, um, which is something that the random slip is there largely because if you do things like at the top of every hour, you might miss things that crop up at at odd times, like 10 after, or 15 after. Um, so all of that stuff is put together into a task. So you say, do the task for this group. It's going to be this test. So this might be your throughput test or your trace or whatever else you're doing. Um, you tell it how to schedule it, and you give it a list of where to send the results, which archives get the results. One of the things about pscheduler that's kind of nice is you can actually send the results to multiple places at a time. So if you have your own system and maybe you want to share that information with one of your research partners or something else like that, and they have an archive, you can just send it into theirs as well, in parallel. So um, let's see what's so most of the I'll spare you reading all this stuff out because it's all fairly similar, but um, yeah, so that's all. So that's kind of your 15-minute PS config tutorial, kind of offhand. So was that helpful, Matt?
Well, I mean, I think the scheduling isn't my problem. It's the for process schedule.
Run that by me again. I guess I'm not
I,
that.
I couldn't get it to accept like P4
Oh, okay, I got it. So yeah,
as
so
a scheduled test. Yeah.
interesting. Okay.
Like I can run that manually and have it
Hmm.
run the four
Oh,
threads.
yeah. Were you putting the P into the JSON?
No. Well, I've
That you
tried
were
it
trying to.
on the import with that on the command line.
Yeah. You know what? Drop me a line and we'll get together sometime and have a look at it. Um,
Okay.
be happy to do that for you. All right. Um,
Yeah, because
but
I think
yeah,
in the test spec you have to actually in the
you have to
JSON
spell it
test spec
out.
you have to
Yes.
spell out parallel and then colon blah 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 for
And then
whatever it is.
whatever the number's going to be. Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
maybe tried every permutation, but I have not tried colon.
Okay. Well, or
I
you
did
know what?
equal, I did space.
Or if you want to just email me the JSON you're having trouble with, I could take a quick look at it. Um, so the validator is unfortunately a little persnickety and is not great about giving you guidance about what exactly is wrong. And unfortunately, without writing our own, it's not going to be
I mean, it's
difficult.
pretty good at telling me I'm wrong, just
Yeah.
not in
Well,
a helpful way.
that's
But thank
probably
you.
these. Maybe we'll put some AI into the next release and um, can tell you all sorts of things that you didn't want to know about it. All right. Um, well, I guess if there's nothing else, we're at 5 to the top of the hour. Um, and we can call it an afternoon.
Hey, well, thanks everybody for taking time out. I'll make sure I get this video posted. I don't remember when the next one of these is going to be, Mark. So
I
let
don't know that we've
me.
scheduled it yet.
Oh, we did. Well, let's put it this way. Andy did. He may
Oh,
not have
okay.
told you.
Yeah.
It looks
That's
like the next one is going to be May 16th, which is sort of right in between the Internet 2 meeting and Memorial Day. Next week's talk is going to be about the SC24 wide area networking architecture with the SC24 WAN chairs. So hopefully, if you're interested in that, you can join. But otherwise, we'll talk to everybody really soon. Thanks for your time today.